What if Usopp was a prodigy, the genius of the seas? Part 1, East Blue. In another world, the boy who cried pirates wasn't a liar. He was a visionary. A boy born with the eyes of a marksman and the mind of a general. In Syrup Village, the villagers still heard him shout every morning, "Pirates are coming!" But in this reality, each shout had meaning. Usopp wasn't seeking attention. He was collecting data, measuring how long it took for people to respond, how many seconds until the first villager appeared, how far his voice could travel across the wind. To them, it was a game. To Usopp, it was research. Because one day, the pirates would come, and he would be ready. The day Luffy's small boat drifted into Syrup Village, fate arrived early. The Straw Hats didn't just find a storyteller. They found their tactician. When Luffy declared his dream to become Pirate King, Usopp didn't laugh. He saw a man whose instincts were perfect, but whose plans were chaos. And in Luffy, Usopp saw something he could support, a force of nature that needed direction. In this timeline, Usopp's charm and intelligence shone immediately. His engineering, his eye for movement, his uncanny ability to predict an opponent's next step, even Zoro noticed. When Captain Kuro attacked, it wasn't a desperate fight for survival. It was an ambush that Usopp had already predicted 3 days earlier. He knew Kuro's reputation, tracked unusual activity near the mansion, and even set smoke traps across the northern slope. When the fight began, it was over in minutes. Zoro's blades cut through chaos, Luffy's fists crushed the plane, and Usopp's precision fire ended it, a single hockey-infused pellet right between Kuro's eyes before he could vanish into his speed. Kaya lived. The village survived. And Luffy smiled wider than ever. "Join my crew," he said, grinning. "You're amazing." Usopp hesitated, not out of fear, but out of calculation. But something in Luffy's honesty made him nod. "Then let's make you Pirate King," he said quietly. "I'll handle the planning." After the battle, they were gifted the Going Merry as the original story. When the crew reached the Bharati, it wasn't chaos. Usopp had already mapped the ship's layout and figured out escape routes in case of enemy attack. So when Don Krieg arrived, he was ready. Explosive impact pellets and smoke fields turned the sea battle into controlled disorder. Luffy still took center stage, but Usopp ensured no civilian casualties, coordinating from the sidelines like a battlefield commander. And amid the wreckage came a silhouette on a tiny boat, Dracule Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Usopp watched him duel Zoro, every motion recorded in that razor-sharp mind. He would later use that memory to help Zoro train, mapping out counters, predicting swing velocity, turning defeat into data. After the battle, Sanji joins the crew, and Nami left for her hometown. By the time Arlong Park came, the Straw Hats weren't just a crew. They were a unit guided by Usopp genius tactics. In the fight against Arlong, Usopp was no longer the one running. He was leading villagers through the burning streets, his hockey-coated shots shattering walls and shark teeth alike. When Arlong fell, Nami didn't cry alone. Usopp had already rigged the tower's supports, making sure Luffy's final punch collapsed it perfectly. And when the dust settled, he handed her the map of her new home. Arlong Park, reclaimed territory of Nami of the Sea. Even in Logtown, where the Straw Hats faced their last trial before the Grand Line, things changed. Smoker was dangerous, but Usopp's quick thinking, sealing off alleys with smoke traps and hockey pellets, caused the Marines to back down. By the time they sailed for Reverse Mountain, the name Straw Hat Pirates already carried weight, not for destruction, but for precision. Every victory was clean, every escape was planned. The brains behind the straw hut was Usopp. He was the Batman of One Piece. In this timeline, Usopp had a different dream. He was already a brave warrior of this sea, thus his current dream was to become the strongest sniper in the world. When the Going Merry climbed the walls of Reverse Mountain, the crew was screaming. But Usopp wasn't. He stood calm at the bow, reading the wind and the water. His calculations carried them safely into the Grand Line without a single broken plank. Luffy's laughter boomed behind him. "We didn't die! You're a genius, Usopp!" Usopp only adjusted his goggles and smiled. "No, Captain. I just did the math." Their first stop, Whiskey Peak, turned into an ambush before sunrise. Baroque Works agents came smiling with food and wine, but Usopp saw through the act the moment they stepped ashore. When night fell, the assassins surrounded the crew, and within seconds, smoke filled the streets. The agents collapsed one after another, taken down by hockey-charged impact pellets that hit like cannon fire without ever seeing the white ghost. By morning, the town was silent, and Vivi had revealed herself as a princess in need of help, same as the original story. From there, the story goes the same, but just smoother for the Straw Hat. On Little Garden, dinosaurs weren't the problem. The agents who followed them were. Usopp's observation hockey had grown so sharp, he felt them long before they arrived. When Mr. Three's wax trap closed around his friends, he simply loaded a round packed with armament hockey and superheated oil, fired once, and shattered the prison to steam. Dory and Brogy stood in awe, calling him Little Warrior. But Usopp just grinned. "A sniper doesn't miss twice," he said, spinning his sling. The cold mountains of Drum Island came next. Nami's fever left the crew desperate, but Usopp never panicked. He guided Luffy and Sanji through blizzards using sound alone, his hockey tracing the faintest heartbeats in the storm. When Walpole's men appeared, he didn't waste time. 3 shots, 3 soldiers down. They reached the castle without much problem and was on to Alabasta, where the world finally learned the name Straw Hat Usopp. The desert of Alabasta swallowed armies whole, but his tactics turned chaos into control. He used mirrors to reflect sunlight into blinding traps, compressed hockey rounds to punch through sandstorms, and coordinated the crew with color-coded flares. When Baroque Works flooded Alubarna with thousands of fighters, Usopp's opening volley of shock pellets sent them flying before they could draw their blades. Even the warlord Crocodile couldn't ignore him. The first shot Usopp fired cracked his sand armor and forced him to defend. Luffy still took the final blow, but it was Usopp's strategy that made it possible. When the dust settled, Vivi's kingdom was free. The Marines called the Straw Hats dangerous after that, but not for the reasons they expected. Reports described a crew that moved with impossible coordination. As they left the kingdom behind, a shadow sat reading in the corner of the deck. It was Nico Robin. As the original story, she joined the crew. News reached them days later, fresh bounty posters. Luffy at 100 million, Zoro at 60, and beneath them, a new name that stunned the world, White Ghost, Usopp. 50 million berries for the man who took down entire platoons with one hand and a slingshot. The Marines had started calling him the White Ghost because no one saw the projectile before it hit, similar to the White Death. The journey north took them into the clouds. A beam of light swallowed the ship, and suddenly they were climbing into the white seas of Skypiea. Where others would have struggled, the Straw Hats moved like a machine. Enel's priests tried their traps and tests, but none of it mattered. Usopp's observation. Haki mapped their movements before they appeared. He shot impact pellets through the dense cloud walls, each round bursting into lightning-dampening smoke that shorted the priests' dials. One by one they fell, stunned before they even realized they'd been targeted. When Enel himself descended with thunder in his hand, Luffy stood to fight. But even the god of Skypiea flinched when a bullet grazed his ear. Usopp stood on a pillar 100 meters away, his slingshot drawn. "That's mine," he said, calm and quiet. The next shot split the air with a sound like thunder answering thunder. Enel's lightning shattered against the hockey-infused round, dispersing harmlessly into steam. Luffy's attack finished him seconds later. When they docked at Water 7, Shipwrights and bounty hunters crowded the harbor, each one hoping to make a name off the straw hats. None lasted a minute. The first volley of Usopp's hockey-charged pellets shattered weapons and pride alike. The city's crime families learned quickly that the straw hats weren't prey. They were precision. While Nami handled negotiations, Usopp walked the docks counting footsteps and listening to the wood. He already knew the Mary's limits before anyone told him, thus the whole conflict between him and Luffy never happened, as he knew himself that he was strong and wasn't insecure like the original story. CP9's secret agents never stood a chance. When they moved to take Robin, they found every exit rigged with traps designed from weeks of observation. Smoke, mirrors, shock pellets, each one perfectly timed to separate enemies from allies. But Robin went quietly all the same, a decision Usopp couldn't predict. When the crew launched their assault on Eni's lobby, the Marines called it suicide. It lasted less than an hour. Usopp's observation haki turned the battlefield into a map inside his mind. Every sniper tower exploded in order, every Marine weapon jammed from sand he'd packed into the vents the night before. Luffy tore through Bluno and Lucci in raw combat, but Usopp handled the rest. His advanced armament haki infused each pellet with invisible force. A single round knocked entire platoons unconscious. When the buster call came, he simply sniped all the ships before they could reach shore. The world watched through spyglass and rumor, unable to believe what they heard. A single pirate crew stormed the world government's gate and walked away without casualties. The next morning, new bounty posters hit every port. Luffy's price soared beyond imagination, but right beneath it, the world saw the face that frightened admirals. Usopp the Prodigy, 200 million berries. The Straw Hat got the going. Mary and Frankie joined shortly after. When the Thousand Sunny drifted into the fog of Thriller Bark, the crew wasn't afraid. Zombies, ghosts, and monsters poured from the shadows, but they didn't last long. Zoro and Sanji cut them down, Luffy laughed through the chaos, and every time a creature dared to rise again, an impact pellet from Usopp tore it back into the ground. Moria appeared, laughing, commanding shadows. Usopp didn't give him the chance to monologue. One shot, haki wrapped and wind-driven, blew through his stomach, scattering darkness across the graveyard. Oars fell soon after, bones cracking under Luffy's punches, guided by Usopp's calls. The battle ended before dawn. But as the fog lifted, a shape appeared behind them, massive, silent, holding a Bible. Bartholomew Kuma. He was nothing like Moria. No threats, no taunts. Just a mission. When he moved, even Usopp couldn't read his trajectory. Every pellet vanished in his paw's repulsion before it reached him. One touch sent Sanji flying through the trees. Another put Zoro on his knees. When Luffy dropped unconscious, Zoro stepped forward and offered his life in silence. Usopp screamed, but it was too late. Kuma accepted. The island split from the pressure. When the sun rose, Kuma was gone, and Zoro was standing, barely alive. When Sanji woke up, Zoro only said, "Nothing happened." Sabaody was the next step toward the new world. The Grove Islands shone like glass, bubbles rising through the sun. They laughed again, relaxed, too briefly. Then Luffy punched a celestial dragon. The world reacted instantly. Marines swarmed the groves. Pacifistas, copies of Kuma, descended like machines. The crew moved as one, flawless in rhythm, tearing through waves of metal and gunfire. Usopp's shots broke circuits before the robots could fire, his precision now absolute. Then Kizaru arrived. Light. Too fast, too bright. Usopp saw the kick before it came but couldn't react in time. It shattered the ground where he'd stood. He fired again, compressing air so dense it exploded into a hurricane. The grove fell silent for a breath. Then Kizaru stepped out of the light without a scratch. Another Kuma appeared, this one quiet, efficient, final. They fought until they couldn't move. One by one, the Straw Hats vanished into nothing. The story plays out till after the time skip. Luffy goes to Marineford alone, and the crew realizes that they must become stronger and will reunite in 2 years. Usopp landed on an island, ruled by monstrous birds and endless wind. The perfect place for a man who wanted to master the air. Every day he hunted storms, shaped wind into bullets, turned thunder into calculation. Somewhere in that chaos, he found the Kaz no Mi, the wind fruit. At first, he used it to steady his shots. Then he learned to condense air into invisible bombs, to bend trajectories mid-flight, to make each round explode with the weight of a battleship. Observation. Haki stretched over miles. Armament hardened his ammo like iron. By the end of the 2nd year, Usopp could fire a round from one horizon to another and hit dead center. The sea itself bowed around his shots. His shots could now change directions mid-battle and trace enemies at all times. When the sky over Sabaody turned dark again, the Marines were ready. They remembered what had happened 2 years earlier, and this time they were afraid. One by one, the Straw Hats returned, stronger, sharper, unstoppable. But the air changed when the last shadow stepped onto the grove. His coat fluttered in a wind that wasn't blowing, goggles gleaming with pale light. Luffy grinned like he'd been waiting years for this moment. "You ready, Usopp?" "Always," he said. His voice carried like a breeze before a storm. The Marines advanced, the ground shook. Usopp raised his slingshot. One shot, invisible to the eye, crossed the grove and detonated with the sound of thunder. The Marines and pacifistas were defeated before ever setting eyes on the crew. The crew stood together again, but this time with a powerhouse on the crew, Usopp. The new world waited, but the first test came beneath the sea, Fishman Island. The ocean trembled when their ship crossed into its depths. Hordes of soldiers and weapons waited for them, but their strength was meaningless. Usopp's observation. Haki painted the battlefield like a map in his mind. Every heartbeat, every current, every angle of movement. His shots traveled through water as if it were air, bending around coral and armor alike. When Hody Jones unleashed his army, the fight ended in a storm of compressed air and light. Each pellet carried layers of power, invisible armament coating the core, air pressure surrounding it like a blade. When they hit, they didn't explode, they erased. By the time Luffy stepped forward to land the final blow, there was nothing left to resist. The crew celebrated. The island rejoiced. But the world above the waves began to take notice. The admirals had always watched Luffy, the unpredictable, impossible captain. Now their eyes turned to his sniper. Their next step led them to Punk Hazard. A frozen wasteland turned to chaos, half burning, half dying. Caesar's poison filled the air, but it never touched the crew. Usopp compressed wind into airtight shields, redirecting toxins and clearing paths for the others. When Smoker and Virgo clashed against the Straw Hats, their blades and smoke shattered against pellets their eyes couldn't catch. Usopp didn't even raise his voice. He only murmured coordinates, adjusting his stance like a mathematician solving a problem mid-fight. "Too slow," he said once. Then he fired. The explosion that followed was a miracle of control, a single sonic burst that disarmed Virgo body, each pellets immobilize his body. The encounter with Law and the samurai were the same as the original story and now headed for Dressrosa. By the time they reached Dressrosa, the world was shaking again. Doflamingo's kingdom of strings and lies might have trapped ordinary pirates, but the Straw Hats were far beyond ordinary now. Usopp's presence alone turned the war into theater. His observation haki stretched across the entire city. He saw through walls, through disguises, through Doflamingo's puppets before they even moved. When Sugar tried to turn him to a toy, her hand blew up into pieces. Usopp had destructive pellets that he could shoot from anywhere due to his immense observations haki. Bodies were dropping before they even knew what hit them. a presence so immense that lesser minds simply forgot how to fight. Their captain won the fight, but even the warlord admitted it before he fell. "The one you should fear," Doflamingo whispered, "isn't your captain. It's the man behind him." When the dust cleared, Usopp stood among the ruins, calm and collected, eyes bright beneath his goggles. He'd become something the world couldn't define. A sniper who no longer missed, a tactician whose plans guided monsters. But even he knew this wasn't his limit. In this timeline, half the crew didn't have to flee from Doflamingo, thus, they weren't split. In this timeline, Sanji still left, but the Straw Hut followed with all their crew members, thus causing an even bigger conflict than the original story. When the seas turned to sugar and fire, the Straw Hats charged straight into the territory of an emperor. Whole Cake Island was a nightmare dressed in candy, and yet it bent before them. Luffy disappeared into the mirror world to face Katakuri, the man whose future sight rivaled gods. Zoro and Sanji clashed with Big Mom's commanders, carving through waves of cream and steel. And while the island trembled, one man stood calm on the Sunny's highest mast, the wind swirling around him like an invisible crown. Usopp. His slingshot hummed, glowing faintly blue with compressed air. The Kaze no Mi pulsed beneath his skin, and with each breath the battlefield unfolded in his mind. Every cannon, every soldier, every spark. He fired once. The shot was invisible, a whisper, a pressure wave hidden in the wind. 3 seconds later, the horizon exploded. Entire fleets flipped, masts snapped, the sea folded inward as if bowing. Big Mom's laughter roared above the chaos. "Show yourself, little man!" Usopp's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You're standing in my range." For hours they played their deadly game, her storms clashing with his unseen bullets. He never missed, but she never fell. He wasn't trying to win. He was stalling. He knew he was currently no match for an emperor of the sea. When Luffy returned, victorious over Katakuri, Usopp exhaled once, condensed the air into a barrier, and carried the crew out of Tato Land through a tunnel of calm. Behind them, Big Mom screamed into the void, half fury, half respect. In this timeline, the Straw Hut somewhat held their own against a mighty emperor, thus gaining even more recognition than the original story. Monkey D. Luffy, 2 billion berries, Roronoa Zoro, 750 million, and then the one that made the Navy tremble, Usopp, the Storm Sniper, 1.5 billion berries. Admirals took notice. Cypher Pole watched from the dark, and for the first time, even the Yonko began to whisper, there were 2 monsters among the Straw Hats. Their next destination was Wano, a land locked in chains of thunder and fear. Samurai spoke of Kaido, the dragon who couldn't die, and of Orochi, his puppet on the throne. The Straw Hats arrived quietly, but the country's air felt heavy, a pressure that even the wind struggled to move. It didn't take long for chaos to find them. Luffy faced Kaido head-on, similar to the original story. The fight was short. Kaido swung once. The world broke. When the dust cleared, Luffy was gone, a prisoner in Onegashima's depths. The crew scattered, hiding across Wano's mountains, planning their next steps. For days, the wind carried rumors of a phantom hunter. Kaido's patrols vanished without gunfire. Ships sank in perfect silence. Beast pirates whispered of a storm that kills without warning. In a hidden cliffside cave, Usopp trained. He'd already mastered observation to the max. Now he stretched it until he could feel the heartbeat of every man in Onigashima. He infused bullets in advanced armament haki and compressed air. The awakening of the Kaze no Mi turned him into something more than human. The fire festival was days away. Kaido's forces celebrated early, unaware the sniper they hunted was already inside their air. They say the wind itself stopped breathing that night. Atop the skull of Onigashima, where thunder tore the clouds apart, The 5 pirates stood beneath 2 emperors, Luffy, Zoro, Law, Kid, Killer. And behind them, calm, silent, and unseen, stood Usopp. Above them waited Kaido and Big Mom, gods of chaos, laughter made flesh. The air trembled before their power. Lightning cracked. The dragon roared. The ground screamed. And then they charged. The first clash split heaven and earth. Kaido's club met Luffy's fist. Big Mom's blade of Prometheus's fire met Zoro's steel. Law and Kid struck from the sides, their powers tearing stone like paper. Behind them, the air shimmered. Usopp had already begun. His bullets curved through the sky, invisible, each one guided by will alone. Every shot struck where it mattered most, joints, nerves, eyes. Big Mom's laughter faltered as her armor chipped away. Kaido grinned wider, blood mixing with thunder. "Finally," he said, "a challenge." But even together, the 5 could only push back the storm for so long. Kaido's swing crushed mountains. Big Mom's scream sent shockwaves that burned the air. One by one, the new generation began to falter. Killer was first to fall, crushed under a bolt of lightning. Kid followed, broken but smiling, metal dissolving into sparks. Law's energy flickered, his room collapsing around him. Zoro unleashed Asura, slashing through Kaido's scales and carving blood from a god, but the effort shattered him, and he fell. And finally Luffy, defiant to the end, struck Kaido with everything he had, breaking through the dragon's breath and smiling even as he hit the ground. Usopp lowered his goggles. His heart was steady, though blood dripped from his jaw. The battlefield was quiet except for Kaido's laughter. "Still standing, sniper?" Kaido growled. Big Mom raised her sword. "Then you die last." Big Mom swung first. The sword split the mountain. It never reached him. The air bent. The attack dissolved into mist. Usopp vanished, reappeared behind her, feet silent, hands steady. The slingshot hummed with pressure so dense it warped light. "Trajectory set," he whispered. Then he fired. The pellet traveled faster than sound. Pressure and hockey fused into one. It curved mid-flight and had the energy of a nuke. The explosion that followed erased the peak of Onegashima's skull. Big Mom screamed, her body crashing through her own lightning. Kaido roared, charging through the debris, dragon fire filling the sky. Usopp didn't move. His shots flew on instinct now, each one finding the heart of the storm. When the dust cleared, Usopp was still there. One knee down, blood streaming from his mouth, but the wind holding him upright. He lifted his weapon one last time, arms shaking, and fired a single white shot. The sky turned day. The shockwave split clouds across all of Wano. Both Yonko stumbled, burned and bleeding, wounded not by muscle, but by calculation. For the first time, Kaido's grin faded. Big Mom's laughter died, but even storms fade. The wind faltered. Usopp fell to his knees, consciousness slipping. He'd fought them both to a standstill, but 2 Yonko were too much for one man. He looked at the fallen around him, Zoro's sword buried in stone, Luffy's hand twitching in the dust, and smiled faintly. "Your turn, Captain," he whispered. And then he fell, the wind catching him before the ground could. He had stalled 2 gods and bought time for the next to rise. In the lower levels, Luffy's heartbeat changed. The rhythm pulsed through the rubble like thunder, steady, wild, free. Drums of liberation. He rose, light spilling from his body like dawn. Gear 5th, the awakening of the sun, God Nika. Above, Big Mom still fought. Laughing even through her burns, her armor shattered by Usopp's earlier strikes. Law and Kid, their powers drained to the edge, faced her together. Big Mom fell through the earth in a final scream of lightning and molten sugar. Kaido followed soon after, his laughter echoing into the clouds as Luffy's final blow sent him crashing into the fire below. Days after Kaido's and Big Mom's fall, before the new age had even begun, the ground trembled once more. Admiral Ryokugyu, the Green Bull, had arrived in Wano. They noticed him way earlier with Usopp observation haki, and Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp came to confront him. The battle began before the Admiral could move. Luffy's punch broke the sky, turning sunlight to smoke. Zoro's blades sang through the air, their haki slicing through Green Bull's vines before they could regrow. Sanji blurred in flame, his kicks exploding against trunks thicker than towers. Usopp's shots bent around his allies, moving like guided spirits. Each pellet detonated with precision, not random, not rage, but design. The Admiral roared, shifting into a giant tree form, vines sprouting across the battlefield. A single shot tore through Green Bull's roots, snapping his power like glass. When he tried to flee, his knee joints were shattered by Usopp's pellets. Zoro stepped forward, sword at his throat. For the first time, an admiral fell to pirates, not in death, but in defeat. Green Bull was in chains, stripped of his justice, sea-stone cuffs clinking against his skin. The crew gathered around the subdued admiral, unsure what to do next. "Should we turn him in to the Marines?" Nami asked. Usopp was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We don't need to keep him. But someone else does." It was a plan only the White Ghost could have thought of. The bounty-hunting empire of Buggy, Crocodile, and Mihawk had risen from the chaos, a group that hunted Marines instead of pirates. By giving them an admiral alive, the Straw Hats sent a message louder than any warship. The age of the world government's fear is over. The exchange was quiet. Under cover of mist, Crocodile's ship met the Thousand Sunny at sea. Crocodile's smirk barely hid his disbelief. "You actually caught an admiral?" Mihawk's eyes lingered on Zoro for a moment, the old rivalry flickering between them before nodding in respect. Buggy, of course, fainted at the sight of Green Bull in chains. By sunrise, the world knew. A Yonko crew had captured an admiral and handed him to Cross Guild. The news spread faster than any ship. Every paper in the world printed the same headline: "The Straw Hats break the chain of justice." New bounties followed: Monkey D. Luffy, 4.5 billion berries. Usopp, the White Ghost, 4 billion. Roronoa Zoro, 2 billion. Vinsmoke Sanji, 1.7 billion. The Ghost and the Flame. The world had barely recovered from the humiliation of Green Bull's defeat when another shock struck. Garp, hero of the Marines, had been captured by Blackbeard. In this timeline, the Straw Hat delivered the Admiral, and thus heard the news about the capture of Monkey D. Garp. Luffy, not wanting to lose another family member, headed straight to Blackbeard. The Island of Darkness, Hachinosu, Pirate Paradise, a place where nightmares came to drink. When the Straw Hats arrived, the horizon split. A single blast of air cleared the fog. Usopp's opening shot, a pressure round so large it carved a path through the blockade. Through that tunnel sailed the Sunny, sunlight gleaming off its lion's head. The invasion of Hachinosu had begun. Ze-ha-ha-ha-ha! Shi-shi-shi-shi! Blackbeard and Luffy faced each other among ruins, grins wide, fists already trembling with power. Darkness and light collided, gravity and freedom. The ground folded under them as they clashed. Blackbeard's quake shattered mountains. Luffy's laughter mended the sky. Each blow shook the island, but their battle was only one piece of the storm. On the eastern cliffs, Aokaji waited. The former admiral, now shrouded in frost and shadow, exhaled cold mist. "So the rumors were true," he said. "You really captured an admiral." Usopp stepped forward, cloak fluttering, his breath condensing into mist. "And now I'm about to retire one." Aokiji was no match for Usopp's awakened fruit and mastery of haki. Elsewhere, two figures danced in silence, Zoro and Shiryu. Blades flashed and vanished in the dark. Blood dripped before it could touch the ground. The former warden of Impel Down fell to the dust, eyes open in disbelief. At the center of Hachinosu, Luffy and Blackbeard's fight reached its peak. Freedom clashed against control, laughter against fear. And when the island stopped shaking, Blackbeard lay buried beneath the ruins of his own empire. When the news reached the world, it carried 3 words that no one could ignore. Garp freed by straw hats. The Marines called it treason. The pirates called it justice. The world called it a storm. A week had gone. New bounties came. The Thousand Sunny crested a sea of storms before breaking into sunlight. Before them stood mountains taller than clouds, forests of ironwood, and horns that scraped the sky, Elbaf, the island of warriors. It was said that no one entered Elbaf without invitation. Yet, when the straw hat flag appeared on the horizon, the drums of the giants thundered in welcome. "The ones who defeated Blackbeard have come," the giants roared. Feasts began before the anchors dropped. For the Straw Hats, this was more than a stop. It was a legend meeting another. Luffy laughed louder than the horns. Zoro and Sanji competed over barrels of ale larger than ships. And Usopp, the sniper who had once told tall tales about Elbaf, stood silent among giants, his old lies now smaller than the truth he'd become. The children of Dory and Prodigy surrounded him, wide-eyed. "You're the warrior of the sea, aren't you?" they asked. Usopp smiled softly. "I used to pretend to be." Now he didn't need to pretend. The red shadow on the horizon. The celebration froze when another fleet appeared beyond the mist. A red flag with crossed sabers fluttering in the morning wind. The red hair pirates. Shanks had come to Elbaf. The sea seemed to hold its breath as the 2 emperors met. Luffy grinned, walking to the shore. "Shanks!" The red-haired man smiled back, that same calm warmth that once inspired a boy in East Blue. "You've come far, kid." But behind him stood another figure. Long coat, long rifle, familiar eyes. Usopp. The laughter faded. Usopp stepped forward, the wind growing cold around him. Father and son. They faced each other across the sand. 2 snipers, 2 stories. Usopp tried to speak first. "You've grown stronger than I imagined." Usopp's voice was steady. "And you left before you ever tried to imagine it." The island went silent. Even the giants sensed the weight of their words. Usopp's hand twitched toward his rifle. It wasn't that simple. "It was," Usopp cut in. "You chose adventure over family." He raised his slingshot. The air trembled. "You abandoned her, and you abandoned me." Usopp sighed, sadness mixing with pride. "Then show me the man I missed." The wind answered before Usopp did. The duel lasted less than a minute. Usopp fired first, a perfect marksman's shot, invisible to the untrained eye. Usopp caught it mid-air with a flicker of wind. The second shot curved toward him. It never reached. The air bent, twisting the bullet away like a leaf in a storm. Usopp blinked, disbelief breaking through his calm. Usopp didn't move. His next pellet vanished in silence, reappearing inches from his father's chest, stopped at the last second by will alone. The air rippled, bright white. Usopp's rifle cracked. The shot didn't hit him. It disarmed him. When the smoke cleared, Usopp stood untouched, his father on one knee, not broken, but humbled. "I didn't come to kill you," Usopp said quietly. Shanks watched in silence. He'd seen monsters, gods, and kings, but never a man who controlled the wind like thought itself. He laughed softly. "You've raised quite the storm, Luffy." Luffy grinned. He raised himself. The 2 emperors drank together that night, old promises fulfilled. Usopp sat at the edge of the feast, staring at the stars while Usopp approached slowly. "I'm sorry," Usopp said, "for everything." Usopp smiled faintly. "I know." And for the first time, there was no anger, only peace carried by the wind. As the Thousand Sunny sailed from Elbaf the next morning, a quiet breeze followed them. Usopp stood at the bow, eyes on the horizon, hands steady on his slingshot. He was no longer the liar of Syrup Village, nor the boy who dreamed of being brave. He was the strongest sniper in history, a man whose name the world itself whispered when the wind changed. He smiled as the sunlight touched his goggles. "Next island, Captain?" Luffy turned, grin wide as ever. "Wherever the wind takes us." The ship cut through the waves, the sky clear, the sea calm. And somewhere above, the wind carried a final whisper. Usopp, the white ghost, the sniper who could hit the impossible and never missed.